Real, true, educational, not fake news. The 30th of November 2019, you're very welcome back. And we're doing a video here on Series 18, which is all on the North-South Interconnector. You'll notice my videos all have a number for each topic. They may cross a bit, they may be a bit cross reference a bit, but by and large, if you want to check something, you check the number. And that goes back to all but the first few videos I made when I didn't use that system. Now, this is on the North-South Interconnector. So, this interconnector is to run from Woodlands in South County Meath to Tirleenan, County Tyrone. And it runs through County Meath, Cavan and Monaghan and County Armagh and Tyrone. And we're going to take a look at the stakeholders. Who are the stakeholders? The first stakeholder is the European Union. And what do they want? They want pylons, overground and wind farms. The National Renewable Energy Action Plan spoke of 5,000 kilometres of cables. Some of it small, I will admit. And there was 800 kilometres of it, like the North-South Interconnector. And at least 4,500 megawatts of industrial wind farms in the Republic of Ireland. That's what the EU wanted. Our government is the same as the EU. They're just lackeys of the EU. I met Enda Kenny in 2011 and I pointed out to him what he would do to this country, making a hedgehog out of it, and he told me he'd be gone. It wouldn't affect him. He would do, I won't use the words they normally use, he just craved Angela Merkel. He loved her. I don't know about Leo Varadkar, not much better. They had no courage to go in and try and hammer out a deal. Ireland got all this renewable energy because it was already a good boy and they thought we were softies. So Eirgrid are a stakeholder after the government of the EU, and they want promotion, the career prospects, overhead lines, pylons and 4,500 megawatts of wind energy, and of course with the wind they want the private sector paying for it. In Ireland, either semi-state bodies or private companies build the wind farms. The government wants them, but they can't afford to pay for them. So they get the private sector in and they fool them idiots, and now they're going bankrupt. But that's another issue. Now here is a rough map of the County Meath. Okay? And you see in the west part of it here, you had plans for 87 large industrial wind turbines between Carlinstown and County Meath and into County Kildare. And they were planned by Element Power, a big company, right? So Element Power arrived over and they wanted to give the Gaelic Athletic Association 375,000 euros over a certain period. We managed to block them and they didn't get doing it. And they didn't like that. So eventually the group here persisted. And I was involved with them and made submissions, and they persisted. And I think they were prepared to go the whole hog on the SCA directive if they hadn't win. But the planning authorities ruled it out based on the visual effect and the historic area of County Meath. And it's some of the best land in the world. And the landowners were prepared to cover it in stone and roads and wind turbines. Now just down alongside it here, just down here, you have the pylons running alongside. All of this to the west of Navan town. So if you take County Meath being divided in two, the east part of it is not so far being hit by wind turbines, but the west is, and the pylon. So it's all going in the west, all in the one area, just up the road, right? Now the next thing then is you have the Monaghan Pylon Group. And the Monaghan Pylon Group wanted the pylons put underground. Simple. They had no other goal, only that. And then we have Northeast Pylon Pressure Group, right? They're largely Meath based, but they claim to represent Monaghan and Cavan, and they associate with the Northern Ireland Group. And we have the Northern Ireland Group. So there are a few groups involved, but there's two jurisdictions, so that's all right. Now the MLOC is the northern Meath wind farm of about 45 large turbines, and then there's the Miney group, which is south of that down to Kildare. They're the two anti-wind farm groups. And the last group I think is my own, the European Platform Against Wind Farms. We have 1,300 member groups throughout Europe, in all the countries. We're affiliated to the North American group of similar, and we have about 20 people in each group. So we're quite big, about 1,300 groups, 20 to 30 people in each group, and I'm the Irish spokesperson for that. Now, our objective is none of this. This is all a green, unassessed obsession that's going to cause great problems in time to come, and has already destroyed my environment here with 5 ridiculous massive turbines. Now, so I've shown you the goals of all these. Now, this is the north-south interconnector in black, and there was a line to go from Turleen and down to Shranana in County Sligo, and this line here is the border. See that line there? That's the border there between Northern Ireland and the Republic. So there was other parts to go onto the pylons. That was one of them. That's in the plan. Now, here is a rough sketch, the art isn't good, of a pylon. It's an unbelievably visually intrusive thing, and there were great concerns about the health effects and all that by people who put up a great battle against it. And this is a rough drawing of a wind turbine, and it's a lot larger. A wind turbine is about, a pylon is about 2/3 the height of a wind turbine, or less. Wind turbine is much taller, 126 metres high. So let's look at what these people wanted, what the groups wanted. What did they actually want? So, the anti-wind groups, the 2 groups and my own, wanted none of it. We didn't want wind turbines or anything else. NEP wanted undergrounding. Now, if we look at the fact that the west of the County Meath was having 87 turbines, that means that there was a lot of farmers greedy for wind energy and mad for it. And I went to a meeting of NEP, and after the meeting I met people there who wanted wind, and when they heard I was against wind they got very, very obstreperous. One fella rolled up his sleeves, it's a great idea. He was in at the pylons, and I have no doubt that these local landowners had a huge impact and a huge influence on the north-south, on the north-east pylon pressure group. And we accept that any group has to limit what it stands for. There were people coming in about fracking and even abortion. You can't have that. But the point is, the wind farms are on the same document, the same Grid 25 assessment, the National Renewable Energy Action Plan of 2010. Talks about the pylons to carry wind energy, and the documentation under the projects of common interest for the north-south interconnector signed off for in 2013. The questionnaire says it's for 600 megawatts of industrial wind farms in the northwest of Ireland and for security of supply. So the wind and the interconnector is inextricably linked. Now, but of course NEP wanted the wind, and they wanted the pylons underground. Monaghan wanted it underground. But NEP had the most money. They collected a lot of money. In Cavan alone they got something like 15,000. They got money from Monaghan. They got a lot in Meath. So we see what the landowners of County Meath wanted. They're only 5 or 6 miles away, or maybe 7 miles from each other. They don't change in that distance. They wanted the pylons underground. They weren't pushing enough. Everyone knew the pylons was an awful eyesore, and they wanted the wind farms. And that was NEP's policy. And I heard NEP saying at a meeting that they were visually intrusive, that they devalued property. But I'd like them to explain how you can object to pylons for being visually ugly and not wind farms. What's the difference? Well, I'm going to estimate the difference. I'm not talking for NEP. I'm talking for the greedy landowners, some of whom they represented. They wanted it underground because if the pylon goes underground, they get one payment of about 18,000 euros, around that. And that's it. You get no more. And as a result, these are on your land and you can't build a house near them or anything else. And there's restrictions on what you can build. If they had got them underground, there'd be no diminution of value. You could still sell a site close enough to them. You couldn't build on them, of course. But there'd be a sward over which restrictions would apply. You couldn't bring in a muck spreader or a slurry spreader, which is very heavy. You couldn't probably plough. You couldn't use heavy equipment. You couldn't dig. And so they'd almost certainly be getting a continual payment at the expense of the bill payer. And that was a nice little earner for the farmers. And then they wanted the wind farms, and they wanted the money out of that. So they wanted their cake and they wanted to eat it. Now just to make it again, the landowners of County Meath, about 40% of them wanted wind farms and underground cables. There might be a few would accept them overground. There's always a few like that. But generally there was sort of agreement that they were better going underground. And that was fair enough. I just wanted to know, was it alternating current or direct current that we're talking about? I don't think they knew themselves. You cannot put direct current underground. They're no good for the purpose of the North-South Interconnector to link the two systems in the frequency. And I said that at the oral hearing, and NEP took great exception. I was right. You cannot use direct current to link Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. It has to be alternating current. And I've shown the methods of that. Most likely it would be the middle one, the ducting, concrete ducting and vaults. That's most likely what would have been used. And there are problems with that and there are costs to it. But it must be remembered, the costs are what they cost Eirgrid. What about the cost of the local people? They said, well, we shouldn't have to pay the cost. Having said that, the Irish government is determined not to allow people use the cost to their environment, in their health, building houses near-handed, the value of their property, the value of their house if they want to move. The Irish government's determined not to allow that into the equation. That's the reality. That's another day. So that's the situation. It's now 11 minutes on my video. Now there's no SCA for onshore wind in Ireland. There's no strategic environmental assessment for onshore wind in Ireland, and the Grid 25 was an SCA, but it only assessed the pylons. It's easy to assess them. They just said put them overground and you can't put them underground and that's it. But they admitted in the SCA it was for wind, but there's no assessment for wind energy and there never will be, because they're already being assessed in reality. Because this is about reality. And they're failing. They're all going broke. So it's not working. And we have no abatement of our CO2 emissions. We still have the same CO2 emissions and our targets are not going to be met, and all this wind already built. Now, NEP then came along and they took a judicial review. And the key principles quite clearly state that the courts don't want to be a second branch of the planning authority. If the planning authority complies with all the directives, which are there to make them consider all the different things, and if they make a decision having complied with the directive and taken it into account and give reasons for the decision, you needn't be going to the courts. The courts will not reverse Bord Pleanála's decision, because they don't want to be doing the work of Bord Pleanála. There is exceptions in the O'Keeffe principles, and you can check them yourself. I don't have time. But if the decision is ridiculous, for example, if they wanted to make water flow uphill, you'd probably win on that. If there's something so crazy, but it has to be very much. If someone said you'd nearly want to prove they were having a drunken party and that went on a dose of drugs before they made the decision. It's very hard to overturn a decision once the directives are complied with and the Planning Act is complied with. So the directives are pollution control, habitats, EIA directive and the SCA directive. So if you can show the directive is not complied with, the courts have to intervene. And I read NEP's statement of grounds in the judicial review and I was shocked. It was all about hedges and ditches and the right of Eirgrid to go into the land. And that dates back to 1927, the Electricity Supply Act and Section 15 of it. And they were arguing this stuff. A load of absolute nonsense. Ridiculous. I couldn't believe anyone or any lawyers would do that. And Judge Max Barrett took the review and he dismissed the whole kit and caboodle. Now luckily they mentioned the EIA directive in one of their statement of grounds. You have to outline your statement of grounds, and NEP had a lot of them. A lot of them. And that's bad. You don't do that. You should only have a few grounds and stick to them. But NEP, anyway, did mention the EIA directive. So when case was over, the judge awarded costs against NEP. He couldn't believe they came with this nonsense. He awarded something like 125,000 euros to Eirgrid, and the same to Burplanola's lawyers. Something like about 250,000 euros, I think. A lot of money, if it was even stop at that. And then they had to go to the European Court of Justice, because you couldn't get out of it. And it's easier to get to the European Court of Justice on cost than it is on other issues. And they had to go over there, and they argued, and the Advocate General said that was mention of the Environmental Impact Assessment, the EIA, and that it'd be bad and discourage people to take judicial reviews if you split it up. Max Barrett, the judge, said the bit of the EIA will not cost the bad thing. They can pursue that, and they only pay their own costs. So he accepted Section 50B of the Planning and Development Act. But he said for the rest of the grounds, all the other stuff about ditches and right to go in and all this old stuff, he said they'll have to pay costs on that. He split it in between the part of the case that was for the directive and part of the case that wasn't. And the bulk of it was not on the directive, and he awarded all those costs. And the Advocate General of the EU recommended, and the European Court of Justice, that it would discourage people taking judicial reviews, that once there's an EIA mentioned at all, that there shouldn't be costs awarded. And he recommended in this case it shouldn't be. I don't think they had to pay any costs. So in doing that, northeast pylon pressure actually benefited people who are fighting wind farms, because now if you have a few little things that are not part of the directive, like I might have in some cases, you can get your costs even outside of the EIA directive, provided you don't overdo it, provided you behave reasonably. So NEP actually advanced the case of the anti-wind campaign, and fair play, I was delighted to see them winning, and they won, and that's great. But they only won on the costs. They won nothing on the north-south interconnector. So we look now and see what they might have got. Had northeast pylon pressure went with me and tried to cooperate with me, we had unbelievable understanding of that law. I had people who are in and out who had got rulings from the United Nations and all, and we were willing to share. You could have ended up dragging the whole thing out till even yet. It could be still in the European Court of Justice, and it's very likely the European Court of Justice would have turned around and said the SEA directive has been ignored in the case of onshore wind. The pylons are for onshore wind, there's no doubt about that. It was on the questionnaire in black and white. It wasn't denied in my case in Dublin, and we might be still there, and we might have won. We might have won on that, and what that would mean an end to the wind energy, and NEP didn't want that. So what they actually got was that the groups in anti-wind groups, the MINA and MLOC groups, actually won in the end. They fought so hard that on Burplanola turned down both their planning applications, and Element Power had a hump off, broke. I think they sold some of their assets away. I don't know what's happening at the minute. But they had to get out, and they got no wind turbines. And the people in that area got no wind turbines, and that has left it almost definitely that the neighbouring strip that's between West County Meath and the adjoining strip will not get them either, because they've been rejected there. It has sterilised Meath, I think. That's not to say that they won't come back again, but fair play to them. So the greedy farmers in the MLOC and the Miney area were left with nothing. They were going to destroy their that good land up there. And the greedy farmers next door on the corridor of the pylons were left with no wind turbines either. They got nothing. And the pylons got permission to go overground. So they'll get about 8,000 a pylon of down payment, and that's it. Whereas if they had to go underground, because of the restrictions that's on the strip, the swart, where the pylons go underground, they'd get money continually. And they haven't got that either, because it was never on the agenda that they were underground. Because if they go underground for the north-south interconnector, they have to go underground for everywhere else in the country. And the lessons to be learned from this are that the goal of any organisation should be clearly set from the start. And the goal of NEP was to put the pylons on the ground and let the wind farms all go up, and great. It doesn't work like that. If you're going to kill the interconnector, you have to kill the wind farms as well, because they're on the same documentation and questionnaire and the same National Renewable Energy Action Plan and the same Grid 25. So the goal had to be set. The goal of NEP was to stop the pylons and make them go underground. That was it. That goal couldn't win. The goal should have been to stop the whole lot and insist on compliance with the law. And of course there's always a hidden agenda, as I said in my very first video. The hidden agenda at all NEP's meetings was the landowners that were longing for wind or craving wind energy up there in that good land. They can't make a living on it because they're too bloody lazy in most cases. So the statement is, fail to prepare and you prepare to fail. Right? And the lessons to be learned are, make sure that all organisations have a proper election every year for the officers of that organisation. If there's any reluctance to debate issues, they shouldn't be kept as officers. There should be a proper treasurer and a financial report, and all money should be accounted for. And I went to a meeting in October last year, and I went out for a drink. I had a driver. I went out to get a whiskey. And when I came back in, one of the people running North East Pylon came down and ordered me out. They didn't want me, because I was after being instrumental in blowing the blasted wind turbines out of County Meath. And I don't apologise to NEP or to anyone else. I'm glad I played my part in that. And now, unfortunately, the local people in County Meath are faced with these pylons coming. And the NEP was talking that they don't need an EIA on the ground. They most certainly do. And NEP is saying, I heard them say it, that the council have to set up a construction management statement, and they can be involved. I can tell you, I know from bitter experience, you have no say whatsoever in the construction management statement. That's between the council and the developer. It's Bord Pleanála grants the plan permission. Not only that, if they don't comply with the plan of mission, the council almost certainly will not enforce it. So you can run into Meath County Council and say they're not doing according to the plan, and they'll laugh at you. They do it here in Cavan. There is ways around that I can explain later. But that's what's going to happen there. Now, the next thing then in my next videos is, I just said here, the lessons that can be learned. Next video is to look at the situation in Northern Ireland. And while I'm angry about what happened in the case of the Cavan, Monaghan and Meath pylons, there's still a little hope, funny enough, in Northern Ireland, if people will take it. And I don't think there's the big craving for wind turbines in Northern Ireland. So that's my position. It's an opportunity lost. When the wind protests went to Dublin, we had 10,000 people turned out in Dublin. We had a great day out there. The North East Pylon pressure group wouldn't partake, and they actually ordered the Emlock Wind Farm group to take their name off all literature to do with it. So they distanced themselves from all other groups. And when I'd go down the country to meetings on pylons down the country, they'd ask me, what kind of a crowd is this, NEP? And I'm after explaining it to you now. It's all to do with thinking that you can get your politicians to give you what you want. The politicians were absolutely out of the equation from 2013 when it was made a project of common interest. And in my judicial review, which I tried to take on it, Judge Max Barrett ruled that Bord Pleanála was a clearinghouse and had no substantial decisions to make. There was 43,000 euros of submissions made, and the judge ruled in my case that they couldn't but grant the interconnector. And that was challengeable to Europe if there was anyone able to do it. But you can't go to the European Court of Justice without lawyers, and I acted as a lay litigant. It's very difficult to act on your own, to take notes and all that. So that was the history of it. I didn't have to pay anything. NEP were facing a bill of something like 250,000 euros. I never faced any bill. I complied with the law, Section 50B of the Planning and Development Act. I mightn't have won. Agreed, I didn't win. But I pushed Max Barrett to do that and to neutralise Bord Pleanála. And had that been taken to the European Court of Justice, we'd have to win. That cannot be the law. That is not the law. That Bord Pleanála has no say. So you make your submission, and before you make it, it's a done deal. That can't be the law, and that's not the law. So I hope I've explained that. And I'm down on NEP for that reason. And if they want to meet me and debate it publicly, I'm here ready to go. I'll go to any place. I have to think I'm wrong. I'm calling them out. Let's have a debate on it. Or else I'll shut up, because you made a complete dog's dinner of this whole thing by capitulating to a crowd of greedy farmers up there in County Meath. You should have ignored them. It's not easy doing it. It takes courage. I accept that. And I'm not saying any other group would do much better. But it's an absolute scandal that these pylons are going ahead without ever the European Court of Justice having its say. And it's quite likely that the Irish Supreme Court would have actually ruled with us on that. They would have actually stopped it. The Minister Nocton admitted in the Dáil that he can't bring in guidelines for wind farms because of the SCA directive. And he's restricted that way. So that's the story. Where there is resources, it's important to use them. And there's ways of dealing with all these situations, and I believe I had the right way if we had to get a chance. It's water under the bridge now. It's too bad for so many people up there. And in case anyone reads me wrong here, there is at least 40% of the farmers in County Meath who don't want any of this nonsense. There's at least 40% here in my area in Kingscourt and Cavan who don't want either pylons or wind farms, and they're deadly against them. But there's always the few that do. You can't have it everywhere. You go all out, you go out to win. You set your goal to win, to knock it and put it down. The government would have cried bitter tears. The politicians that were coming into NEP meetings and whinging and bawling and bubbling and talking through their hat should never have been allowed in after 2013. They had no say. And they'd have cried as well. They're not on our side. The pylon groups and the people affected are only about 2,000 people. We don't even have enough to elect a councillor because we're scattered out. And that's what happened, and that's the reality. And you can like it or not, but this is the truth. Let the history books record it, because I was there for it all. So thank you very much, folks. And the next thing, we're going to have a look at the situation in Northern Ireland, where so far mistakes are being made, but they've made some good decisions too, and hopefully we might be able to persuade them to make the really good decision, which I will explain in the next video. So thank you very much for watching that, and that's the situation. Unfortunately, it's a typical and it's so sad that all this happens. Maybe we'd have lost in the European Court of Justice, I don't know, but it costs nothing to go there. You get your costs. You only have to pay for your own lawyers. My golly, I'd have paid a bit to anybody, to NEP, and we'd all have tried to chip in. Nobody be left out of pocket just to get it done. We never got the chance. So bye now, and we'll see you back for another video in a while. Thank you very much.